Welcome to another Pearson EdExcel GCSE Maths Network. My name is Saira Ahmed and I am the Senior Qualifications Manager for GCSE Maths. I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe, and we're all counting down to the Christmas holidays, as I am too. Today's network will be on effective use of self-assessment, and our host is going to be Naomi Bartholomew-Millar. Hopefully you can see her on screen at the moment. Naomi juggles many incredible hats. She's a head of department, she's a Pixel Maths lead, the senior projects lead for the Carmel Research School, and part of a very well-loved group of Pearson EdExcel credible specialists. In the current situation of blended learning and split bubbles, the need for adaptive feedback has become even more important. So in today's session, we will look at the challenges and opportunities we now have to refocus how we view self-assessment and other forms of feedback. We will also consider how pupils view the process of self-assessment and feedback, looking on ideas on how to support them in being effective, independent learners. The session will offer some practical ideas and plenty of opportunity for discussion and sharing of best practice. In order to address Naomi's many questions that she will hopefully present to you guys, please use the group chat function to share your ideas with Naomi and also your colleagues. If you would like to ask the Pearson EdExcel a question, please use the Q&A chat and we can hopefully respond to your questions privately. Today's session will be recorded and you should be able to download the presentation. Actually, no, you should not be able to download the presentation. You will receive the presentation in a few days. What we will do is, at various points of discussion in the presentation, we will input all of the group chat suggestions that you will give Naomi during today's session, put them in the presentation, and then this will be emailed out to you in a few days' time. So if you don't receive the presentation in a few days, don't worry, we are on the case. So the last half an hour of today's session will be an open Q&A where you can ask Naomi or the team any questions around today's network. At the end of the session, there should be an evaluation form that will appear on your screen. So if you do have some time, we would really appreciate your feedback on today's session and any future sessions you'd like to see from us going forward in the spring term. I will now hand over to you, Naomi.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining me today, and welcome back to anyone that joined me a couple of weeks ago for the low stakes testing session as well. And Sarah said there about the feedback form at the end, so there we go. We're starting our feedback session with a feedback form. The aims of the session today then, so there's going to be a bit of research, lots of practical ideas, and there is lots of discussion, and I make no apologies for that because I think that in the world that we're in at the moment, it's such a shame that we can't actually all be together. And if we were together, we'd be sharing lots of ideas. There'll be lots of networking happening. And 2 weeks ago, when I did the low stakes testing one, a couple of the delegates made suggestions, which I've actually subsequently tried in my classroom, and I absolutely love it. One of them didn't work, one of them did work. And I just think that this is a great opportunity for collaboration and for us to be able to share what works and what doesn't. As Cyrus said, what we will do is once we've got all of these discussion points in, we will add them to the PowerPoint presentation. All names are removed, so don't worry about that, so that then you can actually see what other people have suggested we've got. So, right, let's make a start then. Sorry, I think someone's got their microphone on, sorry. Okay, the first thing is just a little warning there for you. It's just that not all suggestions will work in all settings and for all pupils, and none of the suggestions I'm making today are necessarily easy. Students do need training on how to model this and the actions that we're discussing. So this is not saying like a one size fits all at all. So just take away what works for you or try something different, and see whether or not something might just spark your interest. So your first discussion, like I said, I make no apologies, I'm going to make you work tonight. First discussion is, what is the most common form of feedback within your department? And from your observations within your department, what do you think is currently the most effective? So 2 questions there. I'm going to give you plenty of time to write some answers to those 2 questions. So what's the most common form of feedback and what do you think is the most effective currently within your department? Okay, off you go. Okay, so we've got verbal feedback. verbal within lessons, diagnostic questions, verbal feedback most common and most effective, mini whiteboards, assessment and feedback, homework, classwork, diagnostic questions, direct improvement tasks, model the solutions. Okay. Verbal feedback seems to be the one that is coming out the most. Photographing work and providing printed feedback. Oh, that's interesting. Lots of mini whiteboards, yeah. The reason that we sort of came up with the idea of doing this one really was it came out of a discussion we were having about whether or not people are having to quarantine books and whether or not books are having to stay at school and teachers are not actually allowed to take them home. And whether it's just paper that you can take, or if you're quarantining a book for 72 hours, have things moved on too much by then? Progress checks, informal feedback, verbal, written feedback, lots of verbal feedback, lots of informal feedback. It sort of seems to be the most effective. So hopefully, some people have put their answers in the Q&A. If we're doing the discussions one, if you put them in the group chat, it just means that then everyone can see your answers rather than the Q&A one. So the group chat tab at the bottom there is the one that you want to be using just for answering the discussion points, so that we can see them. Don't worry, if you have put it in Q&A, it's fine. I can pull it out of there. Mini whiteboards. Yeah, good old mini whiteboards. Again, some schools have got some rules about mini whiteboards and whether or not those are allowed to be used by shared, whether they have to stay within bubbles. Flipgrid. I've not heard Flipgrid. Liz, you're not allowed to mark books. Is there anyone else that's still got rules around whether or not you're allowed to mark books, whether or not they're quarantined, whether or not you're allowed to mark them? Yeah, not able to use them due to COVID restrictions. You're only marking the big ones, yeah. So again, that idea of like the feedback online, Hegarty and Maths Watch. Okay, not allowed to mark at all, not allowed to mark books, not allowed to, yeah, paper but not books, only online feedback, my turn, your turn, yeah, not marking books. It's such a challenge, isn't it, this not being able to take books home? I'm finding it really difficult, really difficult to know what to do. And the online marking, I'm also quarantining worksheets. I'm also finding it challenging with the online marking when some pupils are sending me things via Teams, some pupils are sending me photographs on email, some are bringing it back in 2 weeks later when they're coming back in, and trying to keep on top of all that as well and seeing what we're doing with that. Just marking end of unit tests. Okay, loads of brilliant ideas there. Thank you. I'll make sure we add all of those onto the discussion and put those on when we share it. So how does feedback actually make you feel? Okay, so that's a question that I don't think we never, oh, sorry, there's someone saying there's classical music playing. Is this coming from the presentation? It's not coming from me. I'm not hearing any classical music. I'm sorry, it's definitely not from my end. Someone's saying that they insist they turn it into PDF files. Okay, so how does feedback make you feel? I've put on there, oh, wow, you were pretty once, because that was a comment my 10-year-old daughter made to me when she saw a photograph of me at university. And on the one hand, I kind of know what she means, because I was obviously young, pre-children, certainly wasn't a teacher by then either. But it was this idea of that sort of like veiled feedback. And often we struggle to receive feedback as well as give feedback. And I had my lesson performance management lesson observation today. And the first question you always get asked at our school when you've been observed is, how do you think the lesson went? And you've got that dilemma. When you're asked that question of how do you feel that the lesson went, you've got two options. Do you say, oh, it's brilliant, it's great, and then come across as really big-headed? Or do you say, oh, well, there was lots of things I would do differently, and then you start to sound like you're incompetent and you maybe didn't plan it properly? And I think us actually reflecting on how feedback makes us feel is really important, because why would it be any different for the students? We're asking them to feedback on something that they have potentially put a lot of effort in and a lot of time into, but they feel quite nervous and quite anxious about that process of giving feedback. people quite often have two different reactions when they give feedback, is that, they're either embarrassed by it or embarrassed to receive feedback, particularly positive feedback. There's just something in our human nature about us not taking positive feedback particularly well. The other side, the flip side of it, is that when we give perhaps negative feedback, that when students receive negative feedback, that they become quite defensive. And again, that's just part of human nature that we do that. So I think just taking a moment to just think how feedback actually makes us feel and how it also makes students feel, and whether or not we should be expecting it to be any different for them. Okay, so our next question then really is, what do you want to achieve from peer and self-assessment? What is the golden aim? What would we love it to look like if we were able to achieve peer and self-assessment in its best form? Okay, just going back to a couple of the other questions as well. Someone's saying that online lessons are a nightmare because of the lack of infrastructure for some students. Someone who had an online observation today, told there wasn't enough AFL in it, but you couldn't see or hear the kids. Yeah, enhance your well-being by buying you time. I think that's really important, Gareth. Definitely learning from each other. Some metacognition. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Susanna's put pupils being able to experience good and bad examples of work. And we'll come on to that in a minute about exemplar work and how we actually use that. How's the most effective way of using that? Understanding how marks are gained. They're confident in able to analyse. God, there's loads of fantastic comments coming here. I'm just going to wait for a few more to come through, then I'll go back and have a look through some of them and just discuss a couple. That's a nice one. Someone's put, sometimes students are nicer to each other. Okay, Kerry's put there, actually, that's interesting. Can anyone actually do peer assessment? You can only do self-assessment. We can still do peer assessment because they're sat next to each other. We're not able to distance them in any way, shape or form, really, in that sense, in the classroom. So they've said they're fine to do peer assessment. But that would be interesting. Yeah, learners accepting some responsibility for their own learning journey. I apologise again, that is my elderly cat once again yowling in the background. I'm so sorry if you can hear that. Positively reflect. Yeah, we're the same, Louise. So can do paired peer assessment, but no group work, no moving around the classroom. Understanding where the marks come from in the exam. Yeah, responsibility back to the learner. I think that is really important, that they take some ownership over their work. And last one, I'll just read this one. Yeah, not to just say, I need to revise the topic, but how should you peer revise? How can you actually revise? What can you do? Give peer pointers. Chris has said whether to do peer assessment seems to be a bit of a grey area, stayed away from it, but might be possible if students sanitise their hands before and after. Yeah, that's a good point, whether or not we have to go to those lengths or not. Like I said, if it's with the student that they're sat next to, then they've not had to do it quite so much. Yeah, my cat does want to be part of everything, Maureen. She's old and she's deaf, but she still wants to know where we are. Right. Okay, thank you for that. There's some great ideas in there. So the dream versus reality. So this is the dream, really, isn't it? Do you remember that time when you could actually sit near students and they could be near each other? And there we go, develop confidence and self-esteem. We want students to be able to self-assess, to make improvements, for them to become empowered to take responsibility for their own learning. But this is my reality. We are a long way off from that. I used to find myself saying things like, just write something down, just write a target. It doesn't matter, just something, so that if someone ever looked in my books, I could say, oh yeah, I do peer and self-assessment. But actually I was doing them a massive disservice by not actually giving it the time and the attention that it deserves, and to try and get it right. At the moment, we know it is a little bit about trying to survive the craziness and trying to make things work in the situation that we're in. And where we are in a situation for a lot of people where we can't mark books in the same way, is actually peer and self-assessment, putting in some groundwork now, trying to get these things fixed now, actually going to help us in the long run. But that is very much to say that this is not easy. And I've often struggled with peer and self-assessment, and I still don't think I've got it right. I still think I'm learning. I still think I'm developing with this, but I do think it is a worthwhile thing to include in my practice. So what were the issues with feedback and self-assessment pre-COVID? So if we were just talking on the call before this, that things will eventually go back to normal. What were the problems before COVID, and has it changed, or are they still the same? So we know there are things like, people have mentioned already in the chat there that there's problems with just online. How do you do self-assessment for students who are working from home? You certainly can't do peer assessment in the same way. What were the problems beforehand, and do they still exist now? So I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. How do we make self-assessment effective? Yeah, well, hopefully we will cover that. How do we make sure it is effective? Francesca, just in answer to the last question as well, I like that you said that it's an opportunity to analyse common mistakes and model from a normal person rather than a know-it-all teacher. Sorry, I'm just going to shut that door. I'm so sorry. Hang on. You can tell it's live. Okay. Students unsure of how or what to write. Yeah, we need to train students on how to peer assess. We need to train students on how to actually do this. Or too critical. Yeah, that's interesting. Whether when they do a self-assessment, are they actually really particularly critical of themselves? How to get students to take time to properly read the work. Yeah, honesty from pupils and training them in keywords to be putting and refer back to learning objectives. Students can't evaluate themselves. They're either overly critical or way too lenient. Yeah, that's absolutely my experience as well, Tracy. Sorry, whoever that was who said that. Fatima, sorry, that's exactly my experience as well of that they're either too critical or they're over lenient. Yeah, understanding where they've made their mistakes. Fully correct their mistakes as well. Yeah, Katie's just made a point there that sometimes you ask students to feedback, self-evaluate, peer assess, and they just don't do it. And it's a massive frustration when you then do have an opportunity to mark the book. So you're going around and there's nothing there. They've not done it. You've taken that time to do something and they've not actually responded. Too much interest in the final answer. Okay, so if we move on then from that, don't worry, there's still some more comments coming in that I'll make sure we get that as well. It's important, the barriers here then really are that it's important for pupils to see that there's a benefit. They're going to do it if they can see that there's a benefit to what they're doing. And we shouldn't underestimate how difficult it is. And loads of people have said in there that actually getting students to understand what makes good feedback, good self-assessment and good peer assessment comments is incredibly difficult. We as adults find it very difficult. If you ever try to write a covering letter and just don't know how to start, that covering letter, don't know how to sell yourself. So students just not knowing how to get going on things like that. And even like filling in feedback forms ourselves, that's not a hint, by the way, that we need to fill in the one at the end of this. So do feedbacks and reflections from students actually work? So do we actually, if we're going to start with self and peer assessment, do we as a teacher need to be marking what they are saying as feedback? And I think that's something that I've started to do more of. So whereas before I saw peer and self-assessment as an opportunity for it to be something that I'm perhaps not needing to mark, actually now I am marking it. I am actually marking their feedback and saying, you know, what the quality of their feedback actually is as well. And that's made a big difference. So I've sort of almost started correcting their feedback to kind of help them a little bit with what they've actually been using. The purpose of the feedback should be for them to reflect. Lots of people have mentioned that, reflect, take responsibility, recognise their own effort and their progress. Teachers need to have that understanding, but also somebody mentioned really early on about the metacognition element of this as well. And if we just say to students, have you understood? Do you understand it? Then that's actually not perhaps as powerful as saying to them, what have you understood? Show me what you've understood. And obviously that comes out from Rosenshine stuff, is about, what is it you now understand that you didn't before? Hattie, in his 2017 visible feedback, does also say, though, that we should be careful when we actually do peer and self-assessment and think about when that's actually happening. If we do it early on in a learning process, peer assessment in particular, then we actually run the risk of developing further misconceptions in students or embedding those misconceptions. And he suggests, and this is just his suggestion, that you should have around about an 80% competency in an area before you start to do peer assessment on it. That sort of deciding whether you've got 80% competency might come from your low stakes testing that you're doing. It might come from your verbal feedback, your questioning and so on, but not doing peer assessment until students actually have a good grasp of it, because actually we're asking your peers to assess something and we have to make sure that they understand it as well. This is one that I've just recently come across, and I'd be very interested on the chat to see whether anybody else is using these maths journals and whether anyone actually has any success in these. Now, I've not actually tried these. I've not tried a maths journal yet, but I would be very interested to know whether or not anybody out there is using these or has tried these explicitly. There is a link on the next slide to someone who is using maths journals and who's got lots of ideas of how you might use them. But the suggestion with these is that they are written at the end of a maths exercise. It's not something that is done at the end of every lesson. It's done at the end of a topic. That it contains really specific details about the areas of difficulties the students had and the areas of success they've had in a particular topic. It shouldn't take more than 5 to 7 minutes to complete. This is all from this link on the next page. It shouldn't be done daily. It should be linked to the related growth in mathematical problem solving. Rebecca says, yes, you've been trying to use journals in lessons. So Rebecca, I'm just going to put you on the spot here. Can you just pop in the chat? How have you found using maths journals? Has it made any difference to your peer and to your self-assessment journey that you're on at the moment with your students? I'll give you a minute, Rebecca. Sorry, I did kind of put you on the spot there. And anyone else who's also using maths journals, just see. The suggested questions here, so there you can see as well at the bottom there is the website link that I've put on with them. These are some of the questions that might appear in your maths journal. What would happen if you missed a step? Where else could this type of problem? Someone else just said tried it, but some didn't complete it. Let's just have a look again. Classwork and learning journals, which we gave a summative question for each. Yeah, I can paste the link. I can't actually paste the link directly, Sam, from this. I'm sorry, but when you receive the slides, it is a clickable link, and I'll make sure that you've got that on there. I mean, if you just Googled how to use maths journals in the class, I think this one is probably one of the first ones that comes up anyway. So that would probably work as well. It's an interesting idea that you sort of keeping your working book and your reflective book almost separate. So those two things are keeping separate. So Rebecca says, it's been really useful to see what the students really useful to see what the students have taken away from the teaching, what they've learned. I think it's been used quite differently across the classroom, and the temptation is to make them into more of a homemade revision guide. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Louise also using learning journeys. Okay. Yeah, so slightly different ways of using them. I'll make sure that both of those explanations, both Louise and Rebecca's explanation there of how they've used journals, because they are slightly different. And Joanne's suggesting using journaling in a different colour pen. Okay, all different ways of getting students to kind of reflect. I think this is an interesting idea of separating the two books out, though. And, you know, again, someone earlier on had talked about how they were, you know, students are still concerned about getting things wrong, and actually keeping them separate keeps one as a working book and one as a reflection of what they're doing. So again, I'd be interested to know if people do try learning journals in the future, maths journals, and just let us know. Let me know how you found it. Modelling. So we do need to model how to do feedback effectively, how to do this. They'll become more confident with this way of working if they're using the learning intentions and success criteria and what success looks like. And that's quite key, I think. They have to understand what that success in this particular area looks like, and what sort of your learning intentions are. But how do we do that? And I find this really difficult, and I've sort of mulled this over quite a lot, particularly with doing this presentation about success criteria, learning objectives. What are they? How do you agree them? Are students involved in deciding what that success looks like? If you use a statement like, I can calculate the area of a triangle. Okay, well, I can calculate the area of a triangle right now in this lesson because you're there in front of me and you've just taught it to me. So yeah, I can do that. I'm successful in that. But how do you actually know that they've been successful? Do you put a time limit on it? Do you say we're going to measure success in this in 3 weeks' time? Is it something that you make a decision about when they do their end of topic assessment, their end of year assessment? I think what I've tried to make my students realise is that success is not a point in time. It's not that right at this point in time, I can calculate the area of a triangle, therefore I can always calculate the area of a triangle, because that's not how maths works. It's about that repeated, purposeful practice in that area, confirming that yes, I can still calculate the area of a triangle, and sort of supporting students into understand what that looks like and what that success will look like in maths. So should it be included as an element? If I can identify the method, I can use it. So someone's just said providing a minimum of 3 success criteria and getting them to highlight at the end of the lesson, every lesson, just as a form of self-assessment at that point. Yeah. I'm just texting my husband to tell him to come and get the cat. Right, so here we go, discussion while I try and get rid of this cat. How do we set success criteria? So how do you decide in your classroom what success criteria is? Is it something that right now in this lesson, you can, I can, you know, that sort of thing? Or is it something that actually you leave success criteria for the end of assessment, or is it incorporating both? Having to recite objectives to learners at the start of a lesson adds nothing to the lesson, in my opinion. Yeah, I think Gareth, I think I agree with you to a certain extent there. You know, it might be that you kind of say by the end of this lesson we will be able to complete this question, or by the end of this lesson, you know, what we want to have achieved. But that doesn't necessarily equate to success in that, I wouldn't say. Yeah, could we get students to set success criteria? I think that's really important. I think including students in the process is really, really important. Yeah, set something as something you want the students to be able to achieve by the end of the lesson and apply. Yeah, I think that's what I have to do. Loads of fantastic ideas. Again, loads of them coming in here. So Mary's saying not using success criteria or learning objectives, use a lot of assessment for learning with success coming from the end of unit assessment. Yeah. So students still being aware of what it is to be successful. develop an understanding in enough detail what went well at the end of each lesson. Again, I've got some more practical ideas of things that you might want to include, that you might want to try. The tick and cross, tell them what they've achieved at the end of the lesson. Yeah, show them that they've achieved something. Okay, again, some fantastic ideas. Brilliant. They're coming in so thick and fast, it keeps jumping on the mini plenaries, testing understanding throughout the lesson. Yeah, what I did with my year 10s today, so I had a year 10 lesson and we were just starting our ratio topic. And what I did was I actually showed them a exam question, which in 2017 paper, I think it was, grades. So I've got a class that are sort of targeted around a grade 6. And in 2017, it was something like the average score on the question of a grade 6 student was 2.4 out of 5, which I was explaining is really low. And actually we should be doing better than that. And you can do better than that. And by the end of this round of lessons, I want you to be able to answer this question with confidence and know how to answer any question that comes up like this with confidence. So there's not a success criteria in the sense that there's not a I can do this, or I can calculate ratio or anything like that. There's a goal at the end of it. They know that if they're able to answer these questions in the different contexts, then they've been successful in that particular area. Okay, so starting small then with helping students. So getting students to mark their work against a criteria. Now, whether that's a mark scheme, whether or not it's a series of statements, and then identify where they've been successful. So then they need to move to where they've not achieved the criteria and how to improve it. Now, it doesn't have to be rigid. This criteria doesn't have to be sort of a strict what that actually is. And someone just put there, student-friendly language, and it's understood. And I think that's really important, that we make sure it is student-friendly. And then independently, they move from stage 2 to stage 3. That they then start to make those changes themselves. And that's that goal, that's that dream picture that we looked at the start, where students are independent learners, where they make that move from stage 2 to stage 3. And this is really a challenge. The second students are asked to make a correction or are asked to self-assess their own work, that's instantly where the hands start going up and go, I don't know what to write, I don't know what I've done wrong, I don't know how to do it. And one of the things I've used, just picked up over the years, is book buddy boss. So first thing, look in your book, then you can ask the person next to you, and then finally you can ask me. Again, if anyone's got any great ideas of how you are moving them to make that improvement, then please do share it. I think it is an incredibly difficult thing to do to get students to move from that step 2 to step 3. And that is the dream, that is the goal, is to get students to be able to independently recognise what they need to do. Student-friendly mark schemes is a really good one as well. The exemplar work, three before me. Yeah, the 3 before me. That's another one. I think that's what a good one looks like. So examples and exemplar work. I'd just be interested again to know here if anyone is using exemplar work. I use it quite a lot. I use students' work quite a lot, and I have sort of tried to develop a culture that I'll talk about in a little bit, a culture of error, where it's okay to make mistakes, and actually having someone's work shown doesn't necessarily mean that they've done anything wrong necessarily, or that they're a bad student, but that there is room for improvement. So I'd just be interested to know whether anyone else uses exemplar work, and how are you making sure that it doesn't feel like that student is perhaps being picked on, or that it's seen as something negative if your work gets picked. I do really like exemplar material with my visualizer. That has made a massive difference. Highlighting students' misconceptions, common exam errors, that kind of thing. One of the things that is, like I said there, the celebration of error. So I've tried really hard to make it this sort of culture of challenge, where error is seen as something as an opportunity for learning, where the gaps are identified more effectively, they're identified quicker by the students and by as exemplar work. So just showing examples of work which is meeting all the criteria or perhaps isn't meeting all the criteria, and why it isn't meeting the criteria, what have they done wrong, examiners' feedback, that sort of thing. I stand a better chance of closing the gaps if I can see part of a regular routine of my lesson, students are carrying out low stakes testing where that celebration of error, where it is okay to make those mistakes, but then we do something about those mistakes, find the mistakes, correct the mistakes, that sort of thing. And I sort of really try to make it as something as a learning opportunity. I'm just looking what's come up in the chat. Use your visualizer, have an exercise book to show how I want the work setting out. Yeah, that's interesting actually, Jake. You actually using a visual, actually using a text, an exercise book. Normalizing, yes. Celebrating, not that much. Yeah, okay. Maybe celebrating was probably, it might have been a slightly stronger word. From mini whiteboards, write the variety of answers on the board and discuss them. Then they've got the opportunity to change their answers before a correct answer is revealed. Oh, that's a nice one. I really like that. That's a really good idea. Writing a variety of answers on the board, and they get a chance to discuss them and change their answers. I'm going to try that one. I really like that one. Growth mindset, important to get feedback rather than to get 100%. So Mary's just said, spot the mistake. I make out the student didn't listen to the teacher, makes the students laugh. With tests, I focus on what they got correct rather than what they got wrong. Okay. When I'm marking, actually, I generally don't mark correct work. I just mark the things that they've got wrong as well. That has sped up my marking process as well. That's made a big difference. If you're perhaps not as confident, show a good, a bad and the ugly and don't tell them which and let them justify. Again, I like that. I really like that idea, good, a bad, the ugly, and get them choose which one's which. If you do want to use some examples that are already freely available, I know obviously we have an infinite number of options when we've got all the student work right in front of us, but if perhaps you want to try this the first couple of times without using student work, I do use the ones that are available from Pearson as well. These are examples of students' responses to questions. What I tend to do is cover up the marks that have been given and then ask the students to mark the work and to give a score. I find that either students are massively overgenerous or incredibly harsh. There's no sort of in between. And then I would then give them the mark and also the examiner's sort of report on this question as well. I think it's been really, really good, really great with Year 11. They've loved doing this. The Year 11s have particularly enjoyed doing this activity recently before they were isolated, as a way of seeing where the marks come from, particularly those questions where they have to explain. And I think, so those are available if you want to see those. They're a great opportunity to use those. Another one that I like using is Feedback Detective. I don't know if anyone's seen these before. The Feedback Detective, the peer, the person sat next to them, has to spot some mistakes. I usually say you have to find 3 mistakes in their work, or tell them how many mistakes they've made, and they then have to give it back to their partner, who has to then find and correct those mistakes. Now, what this does is a couple of things. It actually makes quite a big competitive discussion with the students, because if the person who's doing the marking says you've got 3 mistakes, find them, and the other person says no, I haven't, then actually they end up getting into like a bit of a dialogue. They get into this sort of quite a big dialogue about what isn't a correct answer, and why one person's got it right and why the other one thinks that they've got it wrong, and so on. So that's a really good one. So the peer doesn't actually do any marking, they just have to find some incorrect answers. A few of you just on the chat were just asking whereabouts you can find the exemplar material, and Seb has just put the link up there for you as well in the chat, so that is available in there. Loads and loads of examples of student responses. It's fantastic. Really useful, really great to show them. Like I say, I always take the marks off first and then give it to the students and ask them to mark it and see whether they agree. It's also a really good one to do with your department as well, to see whether or not they, obviously a bit of standardisation there with your responses. But students in particular, I know it wasn't written with that in mind, but I actually like using them with students. Setting goals then. How do we set goals for students? How do we expect them to be able to set a goal? Do we ask them to set a short, a medium or a long-term goal? And do we actually model what that looks like? So can we use the feedback that we give them and then review those goals and explain how to reach the goals and support students on how to monitor their progress towards meeting this goal? And we've all heard before, I'm sure lots of people have seen it, this idea of the SMART targets. So asking them, but again, perhaps just reminding students, because I think this was something, SMART targets was something that was really popular, certainly in my school, sort of about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. Everybody was, SMART targets were all over the place, that's what staff had to use. And then it sort of fell out of favour a little bit. Fell out of favour a little bit. But actually does really have a place, does really work, so that they keep it specific. How are they going to measure it? What action are they going to take? Is it relevant and challenging in a time? And I think students like this because it gives them a structure. It gives them a structure to how they might set themselves a target of what they might do. And this will be something that's slightly longer term. So not necessarily just a small piece of work that we're asking them to self-assess or peer mark, but something that actually long-term goal. What is it they want to achieve and how are they going to get there? And it's not, like someone said before, it's not just putting that age-old thing of revise more or practice more, because actually that's not really testing them on whether or not it's relevant and challenging. How are they going to know they've achieved it? Another one that I quite like is this monitoring templates. So what is their goal? What is their learning goal? And again, how do we actually set that goal? That's quite difficult for us to do, for students to do. What are they going to do to get there? And how do they know that they've got there? What does success look like? Now, again, this isn't easy and students don't find these particularly easy to fill in to begin with, but I'm going to show you some support, some ideas of things that you might want to use to help students, like sentence starters that get them going with these monitoring templates. But having something like that, setting it out like that, just again, kind of helps students to set that goal with what we're asking them to do. So here we go, just a couple of some practical ideas now. So the first one is prompts and sentence starters. Now, when I'm doing peer assessment, I always get the student, now this was pre-COVID when the books might be travelling around the classroom a little bit more rather than just the person sat next to them. I always get the person who is peer marking to sign it. And the reason that I do that is that I want them to understand that there's an element of respect, that there's an expectation that this is done properly and that they take this seriously. And there's just something about asking them to sign it that makes that feel a little bit more formal. So it's not just a tick and flick exercise, it's something that I'm expecting them to do properly and well. I do also give students sentence starters to get them going. This website, again, the two links are on the slides here as well, from where I got these two things from here. But the first one is some sort of great ideas to help students who are peer assessing for ideas to how to start a sentence. And again, some of these could be used for self-assessment ones as well. This might be something that you just do at the end of a topic rather than on a regular basis. The other one that's on there as well is, this is one that Pietro's mentioned a few times, is these feedback forms. Yeah, someone just said signing, it's a great idea. Honestly, it made a massive difference when I got the person peer marking to sign it. It just changed how they viewed peer marking. The feedback forms that are on there on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint, these are from Access Maths. Again, superb website. I demonstrated this last week with the low stakes testing. If you haven't ever seen Access Maths, I can highly, highly recommend it. They have on there, the person that's made this has got all of these feedback forms as well. And these, again, are superb for all of these topics. For the feedback that could come back, that feedback bit can be filled in by me, it might be filled in by the student, or it might be filled in by a peer. And then they have to answer, they have to respond with an action. What are they actually going to do to respond to this feedback? And then there are three sections of the questioning, the fluency, the reasoning, and the problem solving. It's a really, really good, easy sheet to have. We photocopy these onto a different colour paper so that they're really identifiable. That might be something that, again, you might put in your maths journal or in your reflection log or whatever it is that you want to call it. Gareth's saying they're really good. I'm assuming, Gareth, you've been using these as well. Really, really quick, really easy to download. But again, on Access Maths, just on a slightly another topic, loads of stuff on there which has been fantastic for revision and retrieval practice and low stakes testing. So if you haven't been on the Access Maths website, that would be my one definite takeaway for maths in general, is to go and have a look on that website. Other ones is just some sentence starters. So actually just having these in the front of their books for students, or up on the wall or on the screen, or however it is that you want to use it, to just to help students get started. So For peer marking, things like, I like the way you did well on, you're getting better at, and that's quite nice that you're getting better at. If it's, again, at the moment, all my peer marking is taking place with the person sat next to them, so it's always the same person marking it. So actually they should be able to start to see some progress. You seem to have struggled with, in order to meet the success criteria you need to, and so on. Next time if you add. And again, as soon as I started showing students these sentence starters, they were able to get going. And now they're better. They're getting better. Some classes, not all. This is absolutely not working in every class. But in some of those classes where they've shared these sentence starters, they now don't need them because they know the kind of thing that I'm expecting them to write when they're giving feedback. A couple of other things, a couple of other sort of resources there as well. The Bloom sort of level of questions. Not specifically for feedback, but actually they do really work for feedback, and the peer conversation stems. Again, the admiration one, perhaps not quite so much, but certainly in the question and the clarification and so on. The sort of the two things are sentence starters. They also help to stretch the more able in the class as well, because they're really sort of trying to think about how they can extend the work and the sort of the sentence prompts. So someone's just said another tip for me, used only self-assessment starters before. What happens when both are making the same mistake and can't do it, can't see it? Now that's really interesting, and that's where it kind of comes into this idea that I will mark the feedback. So I mean, I don't look at every single thing, because otherwise that the whole point is that they're doing some of the marking. But I do sort of do a random selection of, making sure I'm looking at their feedback as well and seeing whether or not the same the same thing. Does Access Maths have answers? I don't. Do you know what? That's one of the things that I've been trying to find out. I can't see the answers, but it could be that I'm looking in the wrong place. At the moment, as it stands, I do all the answers myself. I'm just making all the answers myself. So I don't know is the honest answer to that one. Just a grid here. The maths processing rubric, again, link on the bottom of the page there. Really nice one. My lower ability groups like this because they place themselves. I'm not actually asking them to write anything down. Oh, yes, I do show them the answers. Yeah, I do show them the answers. So sorry, back to the grid thing. I just asked them to place a counter. Where do they think they are at the moment? Why can they justify why they've put the counter on a particular point? And I think that's just as powerful as them physically writing some feedback. And particularly for students who are perhaps struggling with English, English as a second language and so on as well, that if they can just put their counter on and they can tell me where they feel they are. And then actually sometimes the TA that's with them, or me, or if they're doing some work with the person sat next to them, might say, actually, no, I think you're here. So you could use different coloured counters. So they could use a different coloured counter for a peer and a self. Take a photograph if you want to, if that's what you want to do. But this is really nice. This grid is really nice, like I said, particularly for my lower ability students who are able to place themselves on there with what they're doing. Some more practical ideas. These are just things that, I will definitely share this presentation. The presentation will be shared along with all of the discussion points that are on here as well. Highlight your best bits of work from today and explain why. Write me somewhere, show me somewhere where you've met the success criteria. Write me a question. I can ask you to show me your understanding. Exit tickets. There's loads and loads of exit tickets around. Some work, some don't. I don't sort of like them or dislike them necessarily. I think if used well, I think they have a place. If you're doing things like 3 things I know, 3 questions I still have, that sort of thing, that could work. Do you write one for each topic or each lesson? Again, I think there's a whole presentation even on how people are using exit tickets and to sort of be effective. And I'm sure there's lots of other practical ideas people have got as well. Self-reported grades and self-expectations. Now, for those of John Hattie, been around for a long time, and I'm sure lots of people are well versed on John Hattie and and his research. But don't worry if you're not, if it's the first that you've heard of it. But John Hattie had done some research and said that students who are effective at self-reported grades and self-expectations can have, as an intervention, can make an improvement of a grade of 1.33. Now that's a significant amount. That is, in terms of GCSE grades, that would make a big difference. But what does this actually mean? And it means about students really understanding what their grades are. What they need to do to achieve that grade. What their currently working at, and their expectation of success, that they believe that they can do well, that they can believe they will be successful. But asking students just to predict their success, we can improve that even further if they're aware of what success actually looks like and how to ensure that they then exceed those expectations as well. And mark schemes is a particularly powerful one and a great task in maths, and an easy one for us to do in terms of our subject. So research back in 1992 suggested that students who were able to generate and answer their own questions outperformed comparable groups who prepared in more conventional ways. So when students are encouraged to set a question, mark an answer, and then design their own question of a similar level but perhaps in a different context, are going to be more successful. So I've just put here a practical idea of sort of a process that I would go through with students doing this, is where they would answer a question. I ask them to predict their success, so they're almost self-assessing before they've actually got the answer. So can they predict how well they've done in a question before they actually get the mark scheme or the success criteria, or whatever it is that we're using? Then they mark it themselves. And then they write their own question in a different context and have to produce a mark scheme as well. And the evidence around this, not just in maths, in science and other subjects as well, but in maths, is that if students are able to do this, then they have a much better, much deeper understanding of what the expectations are around those questions, can apply it in a different context, can write a mark scheme, and therefore really understand the gradiness of that grade, the sort of the score of that score, if that makes sense, and then are going to be more successful. So just sort of a slightly different way of doing self-assessment. So a few sort of takeaways really for you here then, just as we sort of come towards the end. Providing opportunities for students to self-assess and peer assess, and making it part of a regular routine. So not something which is just done at the end of a lesson. It's part of that regular routine, and it's not rushed, and it's given some time and some thought to how it's going to be successful. Modelling and scaffolding how to carry out effective self-assessment and peer assessment, and monitoring what students are actually writing down and ensuring that it is purposeful and it is going to make a difference. Using that explicit assessment language, sort of evaluations, reflections, having goals, having targets. Share the reasons with pupils. I think if students understand why we're doing something, they're far more likely to be engaged with us. So actually getting students to be part of that process, understanding why self and peer assessment is powerful, but also them being involved in making that decision of what success might actually look like, and making that criteria transparent to the pupils. Now, whether that is lesson by lesson, if that's how some people prefer to do it, or whether it's more by the end of a topic and so on. Teach the habits of collaboration, make it part of the expectations of the classroom and the aims of the work and progress towards it. So we can create the most amazing lessons, but unless pupils are actually given that opportunity to reflect and self-monitor, we're not harnessing the full power of this partnership that we have with the pupils, and share it with pupils and explain why we're doing it. If we can get this right, then we can really sort of improve their metacognition skills. You know, what do I know? What do I still need to know? How am I going to get there? How am I going to improve this? And, you know, sort of them seeing their learning achievements. So just to finish with, I just want to think about, just type in the chat, because again, this was fantastic last time when people were able to do this, is what's your takeaway from this? What are you going to try, change, explore a little bit further? Is there something today that's just kind of sparked you, or is it you think, actually, no, I'm doing everything right already? You know, what is it that you might want to do that's slightly different to take away further? And any further questions? So somebody's just asked about the recording. Oh, Seb's answered for me. Thank you, Seb. So I'll just give you a minute just to type in there, what is your one takeaway from this? Yeah, the slides will be available too in a few days' time. The slides we'll just wait for all the chat to be put onto the slides, and then we will get that sent out to you. Investigating learning journals. Okay, so that seems to be a popular one. The good, the bad, the ugly. I'm going to try that. I really like that. What else we've got? Scaffolding, feedback detective, maths rubric, signing it, ownership of assessment. Yeah, teacher marking of feedback. I know, Emily, that's like, it sounds almost like a bit, I don't know, counterintuitive that we're getting them to do peer and self-assessment so that it reduces our workload, but then actually we're still marking it. But it really does help, certainly to begin with. Loads and loads coming through. I'll just give a couple of minutes for these to come through, and then I'll go just. Sentence starters, exemplar questions, math rubric. Great. So by the sounds of it, pretty much there's somebody out there, there's at least one person that's going to try at least one of all of the suggestions in there. So that's fantastic. Where the marks are going to go. Yeah, the presentation will be available. Sentence starters, learning journals, understanding. Okay, brilliant. Fantastic. So what I will do, just to reiterate again, what I will do is I will go through all of the chat and pull out all of the suggestions that people have made or the answers that people have made throughout the discussion and add this onto the slides. And then I will make sure that this, then Wendy will send this out to you in a few days' time with all the bits and pieces on it, but you will get the recording, will be available pretty much straight away. Please do ask any further questions. We're going to stay on for a little bit longer. If you would, I'd love to hear if people from this have tried something and then it's worked. So you can let me know. I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. I'm on there, or I'm happy to share my email address if anyone wants to email me. I do, we do, you do, and think mathematically, exemplar materials. Yeah, it would just be great for people to share some of the things that they've been doing as well and where it's been successful. Somebody's just asked a question as well in the Q&A about self-assessment methods for FE students where maths learners are purely accessing the GCSE lessons via online platforms for one session a week. I guess probably for that one, the answer to that one would be, my suggestion would be using something around the learning templates. So getting them to keep it quite simple, quite short and quite accessible in terms of the goal that you're asking them to set and how they're going to achieve it. So something around that possibly, something around the success criteria of maybe the statements of the I can, you know, what can they do? What do they think they can do right now? Would be things that I would suggest. Yeah, Katie, interested to know what people are using around mocks this time round. Again, just my school, just my setting. We are using the 2019 summer papers. We've just decided to use those for ours for the GCSEs. We've only actually got the time to do 2 papers, unfortunately. We're probably going to do a full series in April, sort of a bit close to the exams. We'll probably do a full series if we can squeeze one in with all 3 papers from the November. But yeah, we're just doing summer 2019 this time round. That's a good idea. Someone's just suggested about printing out the feedback forms in a different colour for peer and self-assessment so it stands out. But like you said, that does then need to be it needs to be consistent in your faculty or your school. Yellow is our colour. So yellow is the colour for peer or self-assessment or feedback. Yeah, Katie, she's great. It is a great website, Miss Jagger Maths. I use it a lot. I really like it. I've implemented her scheme of work with the diagnostics and then tweaked them to match with what I want to do. But I do really like it for the process that she's got on there.
Great, thanks, Naomi. I think should we wrap things up there? I think that seems to have to reach a good point. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your involvement, and thank you, Naomi, again for your time today. Wish everyone happy evening and lovely week, and hopefully we'll see you for the next event very shortly. I think next week.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone. Bye now.